So, good afternoon. I mean, I don't know if we need I think we need the microphones because of WebEx, right? Okay. So, I mean, even though it's an intimate gathering here, so thank you for coming for this brown bag lunch on that is organized by the Cultural Heritage and Sustainable Tourism Knowledge Silo Breaker. So big thanks to the team working on it, Guido, Barbara, Yuri, and Christiana, and several others who are active in the organization of this BBL. Our discussion today is on walkable cities, walkable historic cities for healthier communities and more prosperous local businesses. So I think it really is an interesting subject in the sense that it spans two of our typical business lines, you know, which is about cultural heritage and sustainable tourism on the one hand, but also local economic development on the other hand. So we're very fortunate to have with us today Professor Salvador Anton Clavé, who is from Spain and is currently a visiting professor at the International Institute of Tourism Studies at George Washington University. And he teaches normally in Spain. He's a full professor of regional geographic analysis at the Rovira i Virgili University in Catalonia, Spain. And then we're going to have John Kirkau, who's a senior urban specialist with South Asia region in the urban team, who's also a practitioner in issues of, you know, urban development regeneration. Who will be our discussant. So without further ado, I mean, I think we want to maximize the amount of time available for the discussion. I'll ask Professor Clavé to present. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining this presentation, and I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks especially the Cultural Heritage and Sustainable Tourism Knowledge Celebrator to invite me for being here today. I am going to share some thoughts about this issue, walkable historic cities for healthier communities and more prosperous local business. I said before to the organizers that always these kind of presentations are a bit challenging because you never know which are the expectations that the people that is in the audience are about the presentation or the title of the presentation. And obviously, as a presenter, I try to imagine that, but I will say that please, if you are more interested in some specific issue that I am going to say or another one, even if you want, you can interrupt me and we can start the discussion, because I try to do a broad presentation, a contextual presentation to explain this issue, but maybe there are some issues, some aspects that could be of more interesting for you than others. The presentation, it's I will say is based or is related with ongoing research that we are now doing at the GW, at the George Washington University, together two institutes of the business school, the International Institute of Tourism Studies and the Center for Real Estate and Urban Planning Analysis. These two institutes, we are now, I will explain later, trying to analyze in the specific case of the city of Washington, D.C., so the metro area of Washington, D.C., how walkable places create spatial dynamics and could transform the urban landscape and also could rejuvenate public space, and how this kind of places, walkable places, not only contributes to the enhancement of the quality of the visitor experience, but also could enhance the quality of life of the residents of the local community. This is the starting point of this conference, of this presentation. But as you will see, this conference goes further from this starting point to try to think and to try to give some clues about tourism, urban development, local communities, and the role of this specific economic activity that is tourism in the improvement of the prosperity and the social equity of places. And when I say places, I am saying basically people, because as you can imagine, I am not, although in the presentation you will see many slides about specific cities, the important issue are people and not the buildings or the transportation systems and so on. Well, the presentation is about walkability, and the first thing that I should introduce is that walkability, in general terms, is not a priority concern in most of the urban developments all over the world, at least in the developments as they are. Maybe if you analyze the narratives about the development, you could find walkability, but when you see the development, then in most cases it's not a priority concern. And I has also to say that is not an issue for the moment in the tourism mainstream research. That is an interesting question, because I will talk about one issue that in fact is an issue that is not well documented, and I think that is important. It's important to notice, and that it's not well documented, although it's obvious that it's a very important issue, both from the point of view of the cities and from the point of view of tourists. Because if I just want to ask you about your experience as tourist, probably we will agree that one of the most important activities that we do as tourists is walk. But walking is not in the agenda of the tourism analysis, tourism development, and tourism research. Okay, the world is urbanization in the world is it's easy to say. Is global driving forces that impacts lifestyles, cultures, and heritage. That means that a big part of the heritage and the historic cities in the world are affected. Are affected by this process of growth, and tourism is another big player in the world in this moment. And when I say a player, I will say that is everywhere. And if we did this presentation 12, 15 years ago, probably we don't have among the top 10 tourist cities in the world some of those that are here. And now it is important also to say that there are fastest growing cities around the world that are very different than the traditional destinations, city destinations. And among them, some that are very well known from the point of view of the heritage. Here in the list, you can see Xi'an or Lima, for instance, among the others that are in this site. Most part of those cities tend to replicate the successful, I will say, successful forms, tourist paths of growth. That means that they used to replicate policies of public space enhancement or urban landscape improvement. They try to get and to develop new cultural institutions. They try and do heritage commodification. They develop global events. They create a global image for the city. They reinvent the city for tourists. They do mega projects. They do these kind of things. The thing is that doing that, and that is not in all the cities of the world, of course, but tourism could be a good friend in terms of tourism development, or could be, this is the case of Venice. Venice is well known for that, but there are many other cities. I am coming from very close to Barcelona, and maybe you know now that there is a very deep debate in Barcelona about how tourism should be managed in terms of not preserving the heritage, if preserving the local culture and preserving the local life and preserving the local business in the city of Barcelona. And that means that tourism, even it could be a very good friend in terms of economic development and community development and the creation of prosperous and healthier communities. In fact, is also an activity that creates conflict in the cities if it is not, I will say, managed. I don't say well managed. I'll only say managed, because the problem is that in many cases, tourism is not managed when in the city. Tourism is marketed, but is not managed in terms of the city and the city development. Here there are some of the problems. You see here these problems, and you see here also the reaction, kill the tourist, or other reactions like this one in your left from Granada, another city, in this case a medium city, a Spanish medium city, calling against the social cleaning of some parts of the city for the tourism development. In fact, there is a kind of contest between this idea that tourism could help the development of the city, and the tourism that could do that through urban regeneration, through gentrification, through cultural exchange, through festivalization, against an important issue right now in many cities, that is the right to the city among the people that is living in the place. That is the picture, the general picture, in which I want to contextualize the issue of the walkability. That is the issue that I want to talk in this today. Of course, there are some good news in this environment. The first, I will only say two, is the rise of responsible tourists. You see here the 71% of the people that was surveyed by this about the travel market think that holidays should benefit people of the destinations. Well, it's something, and it's not very clear, but this is something. And then there are also leading policies in some cities. Curitiba is a very well-known case, and probably it's not necessary to talk about it. But Curitiba is a good example of how long-term policies since the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s could give to the city a different perspective, especially when the city prioritizes people over cars, and especially when the city establish as the main issues facing the society in the future questions like mobility or like identity. That are some of the lessons that, of course, the case of Curitiba could be explained in a whole presentation, but I won't say in this, for the case of my presentation today, that Curitiba could be interesting if we see that developing urban policies that has this kind of focus could be interesting. Urban policies could be interesting for the tourism development and then for the relation between tourism and locals in the place. The place where we are working about that is the place of Washington, D.C. And we, I said before, the International Institute of Tourism Studies and the Center for Real Estate and Urban Planning Analysis, we are undertaking a kind of walkability research and action initiative. In fact, this initiative was led by the Center for Real Estate and Urban Planning, and this center started some years ago, and they did some initial analysis about walkable urbanism in America, about the city of Atlanta, about the city of Boston, and in 2012 they did this DC walk-up analysis about the nation capital model of walkable urban places. Now we are, the interesting thing is that now we are updating this analysis. The analysis in 2012 identifies several types of walk ups in the city of Washington. As you see here, I won't explain. If anyone is interested in that, we could talk later on. 7 types of walk ups. Those walk ups are located in specific places of the city. That means that not all the city or metro area of Washington has these walkability conditions. And in fact, most of those places are in the northeast, but northwest, but also there are some in the southeast. And they are, some of them related with the metro system. But the interesting thing here is that the walkable urban places in the city of Washington are only a small part of the all real estate area of the city of Washington. In this analysis that was done in 2012, the results show that the 43 walk ups in Washington metro area represents only the 1% of the DC real estate, but close of the 60% of the economic impact of the city and close of the 44% of the metro knowledge jobs. That means the jobs with highest added value in the city are located in those walk-ups. So that means that walkability of the condition of some places in the city to be walkables are conditions that are interesting in terms of the economic life of the city and in terms of the economic activity of the city. Having into account all the information from the other cities that the center analyzed, this pattern of Washington D.C. is a common pattern with other cities in the country, in the United States. And in most cases, we could find that the walkable urban is regional significant. That means that has impact in terms of economic activity outside of the city in a part that is about 1-2%, and is local serving in a part that is 3-7%, and the rest of the city is drivable suburban. That means that one very important part of this drivable suburban is bedroom community. That means that walkability has something, the walk-up areas, I will say, have something that deserve attention and deserve to be analyzed. In the analysis of 2012, tourism was off. I said before that tourism, although the importance of walking for tourism is obvious, in the analysis of 2006 and 2012, tourism was not there. There were not tourism indicators, nothing about tourism. In this time, in the update that we are now undergoing, we are analyzing also tourism. We are trying to see how tourism is related in those walk-up areas with other indicators that are related with the economic performance of the city and the social equity performance also in the walk-up areas. That's interesting, the part of the social equity performance, because it's interesting to see that in the case of the economic performance, there is a direct correlation between walkability and economic performance. In the case of social performance, social equity performance, used to be an indirect correlation. That means that as higher is the walkability, lesser is the social equity in places. And even when walkability improves in some specific areas, because of the fact that walkability creates conditions for gentrification, that means that some people that was living in less walkable areas since the moment that those areas start to be more walkable, then these people are excluded from them. In fact, it was an analysis that is not our analysis, but another analysis that say that in Washington, D.C., 55% of African Americans say that the gentrification and redevelopment has been bad for people like them. That means that walkability has this positive side, but also for some people has a non-positive side. In fact, this is our interest, and we are working in this interest in the city of Washington, in the metro area of Washington. We will present the results of this analysis in September in one conference that we will do the third week of September about walkable urban places. And we're now doing that. But the interesting thing of this analysis is not only the results of the analysis. The interesting thing is that doing this analysis, we are thinking about how to go towards a walkable urban tourism model and how go towards, that is not Washington, that is in Netherlands, towards a walkable urban tourism practice. That means that this issue of walkability is not only an issue that could be, is of our interest in the case of Washington, but it's especially interesting because we think that it could be prepare an agenda of analysis and of policy and action related to the walkability and the urban development related to tourism. In fact, here is are the results. I just show the slide, the results of this group from Japan that show how there is a deep correlation between walkability, with the perception of walkability among tourists and the use that tourists do of the city. And it's a very interesting analysis. In fact, they say that the city, the shape of the city, the buildings, everything that is in the landscape of the city, of every specific street, every specific sidewalk, etc., send messages to the tourists, and tourists act and react according to the messages, to the physical messages that those specific elements of the landscape give to them. And that is very interesting. That it's a basis for the development of this model, conceptual model and practical model on how relate cities, heritage, tourism, and walkability. I'm just, since now was the presentation of the interest of I am about half of the presentation, it's 20 minutes. Since now was the interest, it was I will say, the justification and the explanation why this presentation. I try to show you that, of course, both urban development and tourism are growing, are creating opportunities, but also are creating concerns in cities. And when I say in cities, I will say in every type of cities in the world. And that we are analyzing a small part of this problem in the case of the city of Washington, and we will have results in September, in fall. But in fact, the presentation since now has been for me the way to introduce the need of link walkability and not only urban planning, but also specifically heritage management in cities, in historic cities. It's for that since now I will show you the second part of my presentation, trying to analyze from specific examples how this relation between cities, historic cities, tourism and walkability could be understood, and of course how walkability could be a good way to approach the management of the heritage in historic cities. What you are tourists, you probably some cases. what do you value in cities? Well, you see here, all are windows, but those windows here are different than those windows here. They are part of the identity of the place. Each place has its own windows. Well, probably as tourists, we value that. We value, how will we say that? We value the identity of the place. In fact, that is an important issue, the identity. The identity, because identity is vital for the place, but it's also another important question about the identity. That is, although we in some cases only go for, I will say, the diamond cities in the Heritage League, I will say Venice or doesn't matter, any other of those very important city. Identity, you can find identity in every place. That means that when when I will talk today, this afternoon, sorry, for me it's morning, but it's afternoon, about identity and a historic city, I am talking about most of the cities. There are not historic cities and other cities. There are gems, historical gem cities and other cities. Most of the cities have its own identity. In fact, the issue is that in some cases, though the identity of the cities is not in the media. Here you see the city of Tetuan, maybe some of you is in northern Morocco. There is a kind of globalization. Thanks to the globalization, every city, every territory is easy to say and visit. However, those territories used to be visited only in a very short time. We go to Venice and we stay there 2 days, 3 days, 1 day, very short time. And then the globalization helps that. But then the cities that prepare themselves for the catering of tourists, they are cities that are in the map. The cities that they don't prepare themselves are cities that are not in the map. But this city that is not in the tourism map in the world, as you see here, is a city that has the same type of identity or identity elements that could be in other cities in Northern Africa or in the Muslim world, at least in the case of in Morocco. That means that that's important. That will be important because to understand the relation between the city and tourism, it's important to understand that identity is there, but when identity should be referred to the tourism market, the identity should be interpreted, should be presented, should be introduced. And in this process of introduction of the identity, there is one of the key questions about how cities behave and how cities plan and how cities could develop its own tourism development. Place interpretation is the art of doing that. And you can see here a very well-known place here in the city of Washington. That is not, this place is not in the, I will say, in the perception and the imagination of most part of the 20 million visitors that has the mall in the city of Washington. But it's part of the identity of the city of Washington, and even there are some proposals, some initiatives that try to develop elements about that, develop economic activity about that. The thing is that identity is a key question of the tourism development of the cities, and identity, it's a matter that should be well managed, and here there are some clues for what does well managed mean in terms of the title of the presentation, my presentation today, of stimulating the prosperity and healthier cities. Identity could be very different and could be approached in a very different manner depending of the cities and depending of the tourist. You see here, it's not the same Procida in an island of the Mediterranean than Hong Kong, and it's not the same the tourists that go in a group, managed by tour operators, or tourists that go by themselves. But in fact, all of them, and doesn't matter which it is, and doesn't matter how our tourists want to try to. I will say, to search for the identity in the place that they are, the place that they are going. Here is a case, a specific case. Here is the city of Tarragona, the city where is placed my university in Spain. It's a city, it's a World Heritage city. Tarragona was the Hispania capital. I say Hispania because it's the Roman world during more than 500 years, more or less. Hispania City, it was one of the capitals of the Roman world in Hispania during a lot of time, and even Caesar Augustus stayed there for some times. And what tourists do in a city of Tarragona? Here we asked that. I will be very short with that. We asked that. We did a research about that, and we decided to see what tourists do and how tourists search for the identity in this specific city. We did that using GPS and tracking the tourist movement around the city, and we found very interesting things. Of course, although the city is a Roman city, the most visited place of the city is not Roman; it's medieval. We could talk a lot about that. The Roman places are interesting, but are less interesting than that, and the tourists spend less time in the Roman places and the Roman attractions than the rest. And tourists, of course, stay doing other types of things that are related not with the heritage. They do other, like this lady here that is lost in the city, in the streets of the city, and is lost because of the streets of the city are safe, are walkable, are interesting to see. That is also an experience. When the city market the city of Tarragona, they market the city as a Roman city, and you see what the tourists do, and the tourists do many other things, because the identity of the city of Tarragona is a complex identity, and this identity has been interpreted in a different way. In fact, this question leads us to the issue that the way that tourists search for the identity of the city is discovering the city, the historic city, and tourists do this discovering walking. And that is, I will say, a very clear and obvious question, is more and more important right now, because millennials are more and more decided to have an approaches to the city that is, I will say, not necessarily the approach that the marketing schemes has, but the approach that they, as people that used to be informed, do. Here you could see those millennial people doing a very strange thing, that's playing piano in one rail station in France. And they have this opportunity, and they do that. But if walking is important as a way to approach the identity of the place, how to manage that? How to manage that? This is the second question. How heritage cities manage urban walkable tourism? I started to say about that before. In many cases, in many cities, urban tourism is in hands of the marketing people, marketing demios. That could be fine in terms of attracting people to the place, but in many cases, and the case of the city of Barcelona is extraordinary about that, where the DMO Barcelona has transformed Barcelona as one of the most appealing cities in the world, but the tourism in Barcelona now is a problem for the governors of the city. That means that having only the marketing vision, it's a problem for the urban development of the city. That means that it's necessary to go from these marketing tools to the urban development, planning, management, and governance schemes for the cities. That means to introduce these three words: placemaking, place management, place governance. There is a lot of literature about that. There is this movement, place management movement, only one word, place management, that from these people from the Project for Public Spaces, that they are around here, or there is these other words like place shaping that are also in this idea. I am not in one specific. I am going to do a global approach to this question. The important thing is that place making, place management, and place governance should be introduced in the tourism management of the city, the historic parts of the city. Why? Because placemaking transform the city. This is the case of Quito. Maybe you know Quito, some of you know Quito. Quito is a World Heritage City, and it's a place where after the World Heritage, they were very proud to see that most part of the inhabitants of the colonial city, the city that was declared a World Heritage, were displaced to other parts of the city. But in fact, if you knew Quito before the declaration of the as World Heritage and later, has been a process of transformation of the historic city. One of the most controversial issue in this process of transformation was the relocation of the street vendors. Maybe you know, people that were that was the placemaking before of the World Heritage Declaration was done by people, mainly women, that were selling in the street. After that, it was a process of sanitization of the landscape to create another Quito area. That's true, that most part of the people that is living there is the people that was living before, but in fact transformed this landscape. So here it has been a process of transformation that depending on how it's analyzed, because there are this controversy in the case of Quito, is saying us that walkable urban places facilitate the access to heritage resources and positive relationships between visitors and locals. In the case of Quito, that was partially that was affected. About place management, probably you know also the city of Bilbao. Bilbao is a city that is well known by Frank Gehry, designed the Guggenheim Museum. But the important thing of Bilbao is that it is not only this fact, but is that the process of place management involves a living and livable city behind the iconic architecture of Frank Gehry. And many neighborhoods that were disorderly planned before the 70s has been totally renovated. That means that, and those places are the necessary complement for the Guggenheim visit to Bilbao. And that is important. And that's a question of place management. It's not a question of marketing, because the Guggenheim is good for marketing, but the place management is good for retaining the tourists in the city during the visit. So the adoption of walkable place management approaches enhance the attractiveness and the sustainability of the tourist use of the city. And there are other examples related to the governance. Now it's very trendy to talk about Havana because of the visit of Obama to the city of Havana. In fact, it's a very interesting place for that we are talking today, because they are starting a process that could be an opportunity or it could be a total disaster. I will say that, total disaster. Because even though before the opening of the Cuban economy, you could see that. You could see that the thing that you are seeing in the slides. This is the old city of La Habana, that in 10% of the old city has been rebuilt for the tourism consumption. That's right, it's like that. The officials say that, has been little relocation of people, but in fact, clearly most Cubans can't go there because they can't afford for anything that is there. But the fact is that besides the old city of La Habana is La Habana Vieja, Centro Habana, sorry, is Centro Habana, that is the most densely populated area of the whole island of Cuba, with 170,000 people living in 3 square kilometers, and without any type of basic sanitation and drinking water. And that means that here it's a process that means that contradictions between policies and governance can generate visitors and resident segregation. In fact, the thing that I want to say that to you is that placemaking creates the sense of place, and placemaking is not understandable without the opportunity to share this sense of the place between tourists and locals. That is a key question. And that is a question that should be introduced in the idea of how to use walkability as a tool for this process. In fact, that means that place management, that in most cases is a missing level of governance, should be introduced. There is, in the case of the states, federal government, state government, local government. There is not metropolitan government. There is not place management, except the cases where there are some initiatives like the BID or other initiatives that try to go in this direction. But this direction that it's in America, in the United States, is well known, is necessary also for many other parts of the world to try to analyze to try to develop these processes. And of course, place governance, it's about public-private partnerships, is about corporate social responsibility, and it's about community involvement. And it's about, of course, I started this part saying that it's about rethinking the role of the DMOs that needs also to be involved in the preservation and the celebration of the heritage, in the enhancement of the visitor experience, and the involvement of the local population. Well, I'm finishing. What about community and prosperity? There are many ideas about what makes a great place. Great places are healthy. Great place, we could go for 1 hour with this slide. I only want to say great places are healthy. I will show you here some slides or some ideas from one not very well-known place, but very well-healthy place, Toulouse in France. Toulouse is the place where Airbus is based in Europe. But it's more than that. It's not an industrial place. It's a city that is also World Heritage, is identity-based, is accessible, is social capital-based, there are mixed uses, there are diverse population, is livable, most of the city center is pedestrian. that means a great place. There are other cities that try to do that, and a very different context. Cities like Bogota, where the mayor of Bogota once decided to do a very challenging approach to the city when he discovered, I say discover, that only 20% of the inhabitants of the city use private cars, but about the 80% of the total investment of the city was to provide car infrastructure. That means that it was the mayor of Bogota. That means what are we doing and how can we change that? How can we introduce the idea of walking, of biking, if you want, for locals, of course, but also for residents and for tourists, and how can we develop a new approaches in this question? And he tried to start with a kind of tactical urbanism. He closed 120 kilometers of the Bogota streets every Sunday to invite people to walk and to invite people to bike, and that is changing the face of Bogota, and is changing also the attractiveness of Bogota as a city, because that created created new social capital. I just show you
Raza.
not easy place. Well, walkability also catalyzed prosperous local business. Nice example from Europe also, Helsinki, a city that is oriented to design, a city that they are very proud when they say that Helsinki uses design to improve the city, that they are proud to say that the city is created through the creativity of the people of the city. Helsinki, the next plan of the city of Helsinki, it's a plan that introduced the conversion of some motorways to access to the city in boulevards for pedestrians, boulevards, for not only pedestrians but for new business development from local people. The lessons from Helsinki are locally made, innovative, creative, policy-supported, responsible, international, prosperity. We can go to the other side, but cities that are trying to do in a very different way, in a very different context, trying to do something similar. So they try to develop walkable urban policies, trying to affect the visitor consumer decision choice and to develop new business models of local stakeholders. Here is Nicaragua. We are talked a lot about tourism during this presentation. Let's give the word to a tourist in the city of, to a woman in the city of León. León is a small but mighty city, in Nicaragua's intellectual capital, major student city, a walkable city. Was everything that I hope Granada. Granada is the most popular, popular city of Nicaragua. She wanted for Granada living, breathing city. Now, the city of León, it's a city for working people. A city with many problems, because the city at the beginning of the 2000s, maybe you know that 33% of the population was in poverty, and about 25% was in extreme poverty. That means that the situation is not easy, but they developed this guide of good practices, and in this guide of good practices there is a local business, there is another tourist, there are other initiatives, but with the idea of create passion, create attachment to the city among people that is visiting there and involving to that the local population. In this Guía por de Buenas Prácticas, you will find how they recommend specifically things both for tourists and for entrepreneurs. Interesting thing. Well, to conclude, the last slide, why a walkable tourism model is key for historic cities? Well, we're talking about practices, we're talking about models, we're talking about, I will say, about way to see the reality. Walkability, like this book of Frédéric Gros, that is a book from a French intellectual philosopher. He says a philosophy of walking. It's translated to English. Walkability is a vision for healthier and more prosperous places because it can create slow, smart, seductive, safe, social, sustainable, and sociable places to enjoy the heritage, the identity, and in fact to go through the historic side of the city. And that's all. Open for questions.
Thank you very much. You might need to turn it on.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Salvador. So at this stage, I'm going to ask John Kirkhow to jumpstart the discussion. I'm well aware that amongst the participants is the Spanish ED, Ms. Beatriz de Guindos, if she feels like saying anything, and then we'll open it up for the discussion.
Thank you, Sami. I'm going to keep my comments very short. I actually took a lot of notes, but I'm not going to go through them so that we have more time for discussion. So thank you for having me as a discussant as well. And Professor Clavé, thank you for an extremely interesting talk. I saw your title yesterday night. I was thinking this is going to be amazing. Talk about walkability, historic cities, healthier communities, and economic development. This is amazing. And so thank you for sharing your work. So maybe I just wanted to highlight 2 points because I couldn't help but to think also some of the projects that the World Bank are doing. And this is extremely relevant. And you started by saying that a lot of cities, they don't think of walkability as a priority. And I tend to agree, but that has been starting to change, at least with the cities I work with. I work mostly in South Asia, and a lot of times when you go on a mission, we get a lot of requests. Just last month, the 2 mayors from Dhaka came to Washington, D.C., and they were promoting, World Bank, please help us to improve walkability of our cities. Even in my last mission to Karachi, a mega city of 22 million known for violence, you wouldn't think about things like public spaces, but they are thinking about it, and the governor has made an informal request to see if we can help them to think about how we can rejuvenate the city core through their historic district, where there's a lot of colonial architecture, and to improve kind of the walkability of cities. And with that said, I've been involved in at least 2 projects now in South Asia, where we're helping cities to improve walkability. It's becoming important. The first one is in Sri Lanka. I think you had it as tourism growth of 21% up and coming, where we're working in the UNESCO cities of Kandy and Galle. And part of the objective is really to improve not just the basic services, but also to enhance urban spaces. So that includes parks, historic buildings, and kind of to leverage on the assets the city have. And this is kind of in the mindset of some of the mayors these days. Of course, we face a lot of challenges, like how do we think about reusing some of the historic structures? How do we, is there enough space along the roads to even put sidewalks to improve kind of the connectivity of pedestrians to the city? In fact, in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, we are financing a shopping street, where we want to, the city wants to pedestrianize the entire street and to kind of have only 1 lane for public transport. I mean, I've got a lot of interesting stories to tell, but this just recently came out, so I can't help but to kind of relate it. So there was a lot of support. People are, happy about the proposal, but then the pushback was actually from the shopkeepers, because they said, we transact all our money, make our transactions in cash, not credit card. After the day's work, we want to jump into our car because we're carrying a lot of cash and go home because it's a lot of money. So they don't want to. So they're kind of saying, by having it pedestrianized, we can't do that, and having this sort of pushback. So I mean, it's kind of interesting. So maybe I just that's my first point. I think the second point, which was really interesting to me, was you talked about, you explained a lot about linking this whole idea of walk-ups, your work on the walk-up DC, and some of these metrics, like how walk-ups link to 1% of DC real estate, 60% of economic impact for the city, and providing 44% of knowledge jobs. These are interesting metrics that I would love to have a more in-depth discussion to you, because this would really help the World Bank design projects as well. We are very, whenever we propose this sort of projects on public spaces, on walkability, a lot of questions are asked for the task team leaders. How do you justify some of this? How does it filter down to improving the lives of the poor, and how does it improve economic development of the city? And that's really something which, personally I find interesting. I would love to find out a bit more. So rest assured, I'll be there at your conference in September 21st to 23rd to see what you have to present. So with that, maybe, I don't know, Sami, do you want to add on, or should I just open it up to? Okay.
Yeah, maybe as I open it up, let me give you a bit of an African perspective. So I manage the urban development activities in Africa, and as interesting. So I'll give you the flip side of it, the different dimension on walkability, or I'll actually call it walking. So you've presented the positive relationship between walkability, which I mean at the end of the day is about livability, and economic growth via tourism. And I'll present you the other one, which is the negative dimension between walking and economic growth via dysfunctional land and land use markets and transportation systems. So I was just coming back from Nairobi, where we launched our Kenya urbanization review, and 48% of the population of Nairobi walks to work, and 24% use their informal minibus called the matatu. But because you have dysfunctional land uses, in the sense you've got a dispersal of land uses across the city without any coherence, without any obvious city centers or what have you, and because you have a dysfunctional public transportation system, the population's ability to access labor market opportunities because of those dysfunctions is very limited. So the 48% who walk to work can only access 8% of the jobs of the city, because you can walk 5-6 kilometers per hour. And the spread of the jobs across the city because of a lack of proper land use planning has made it such that they're shut off of the labor market. And the 24% that take the matatu because of the congestion and the lack of public transport systems and the lack of proper investment in both the travel demand management and the supply side, mean that they can only access 14% of the jobs of the city. So this is a relationship where walking rather than walkability, in the context of an absence of proper land use planning and public transport investment, means that it's becoming a negative relationship because of the labor market dynamic. And the resulting trade-off becomes a trade-off between livability and economic opportunity, meaning that these households have two choices. They either go and try to find maybe a formal housing unit at the periphery, and by that further shut themselves off the labor market or spend an enormous amount of time commuting and therefore losing productivity, or they will crowd out closer to where jobs might be, let's say city center or what have you, in non-livable conditions, the slums, the squatter settlements, therefore trading their livability for access to economic opportunity. So it's a different, let's say, lens on the issue of walking. And maybe with that lens, I'd like to add, you had your 7 S's in the end, so I'll add the 2 T's. One is transport and the other is tradables. So maybe with that, I'll open it up. So if you can just present yourself and, you want to react? Okay.
Because when you say the different lens about walking, I think it's a detail, or it's a small difference between walking and walkability. It's a point. It's a point in terms of what are we trying to analyze and to do. Of course, walkability is based in walking, but it's a condition of the space, or the certain types of space in terms of providing opportunities. But it's a condition of the space, not a condition of the people that do this activity. But of course, I agree. And this problem is not only a problem in Africa. I think that the case of Bogota, that we stay just for some minutes, it's not exactly the same, but it's in the same direction, because we can't understand walkability, and that was also an interesting thing in the map about the 43 walkable areas, walk-up areas in the city of Washington, that most of them were linked by the metro rail system. That walkability, of course, is related with that. We, in this case, that I agree with you, we're trying to think what walkability could be useful inside, or what walking could be useful inside the walk-up areas in terms of developing a good place management for those areas. But that is a second step, if you want. You did the first, that is more general. That is the second step, is that walking is a good way to have a vision on how to manage places for a better and prosperity and good development of tourism in these specific areas. Just for that.
So with that, it's open. If you can just present yourself and make any question or comments.
Muchas gracias. I would like to ask you to elaborate on the conditions for walkability when you were talking about the walks up. You mentioned, you just didn't elaborate. If you could please elaborate on that when in this DC research. Because you talk about 43, can you tell us about what are the conditions that brought you into this number of 43, that you clustered these places, please?
In general, to be brief, the analysis that we are doing in the Washington and in general in the United States, it's a very unique analysis because we are based in one specific indicator that it's available in the United States, but it's not available in many other parts of the world. That is the walk score. Maybe you know the walk score, and that's very based on that. Then we analyze all the real estate area of Washington, and we assign the walk score for any specific cell of the metro area of Washington, and then the cities that has the parts that has the highest walk score, that means above 75, are the places that we focus, and from them we try to design the boundaries of those places, because the walk score is not uniform in all the place. We try to identify which are the boundaries in around these specific areas. If we have a head map, like the map that I put in the city of Tarragona, we will identify that, and we then design the boundaries of these specific areas that are walk-up areas. We do that not only using computing analysis, but also having qualitative analysis and doing interviews and doing approaches to the people that is around the area, because in many cases they walk up finish in the middle of one street and don't go further, and that is because this fine and detailed analysis of the process. And then we differentiate different types of walk-ups, because we also identify which kind of jobs are in the walk-up. That means that there are jobs that are more regional oriented or outside oriented, or are jobs that are basically to serve the local population. And having in these two characteristics, we finally design each specific walk-up, and then we start to analyze the other indicators that are related to the economic performance, to the social equity performance, and the tourism performance. It's an iterative process of creating first the walk-ups, and then to analyze the performance of the indicators in the walk-ups, and also the same performance outside of the walk-ups. We also identify the drivable suburban areas that are regional oriented. You remember the slide. Regional oriented is a small part, because the thing that we have seen is that in some cases these regional drivable areas that are regional oriented, in some cases they could evolve, because this walk-up map is not a fixed map. It's a map that is evolving, and is evolving very fast, and there are some places that could be in the next future an emerging walk-up, and in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases they acquire the condition before when were drivable suburban places with a high level of jobs regionally oriented. That it's more or less, I hope it's very short, but I can send to you if you want specific information, detailed information, methodological information about that. But in general, is like this.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Beatriz de Guindo, Spanish CD for Spain. I'm the Spanish representative at the World Bank, at the board. So thank you for the presentation. It's really, it was very lively, and it was good to see examples both from developing and developed countries that have done good things and bad things. So it's really good, because this is an area where we all have to learn. And there's also a lot of room for South-South cooperation between developing countries that are really doing a lot in their cities. And the issue of cities is something that we are talking a lot here at the bank and the board in terms of sustainable cities, because we are looking at all the migration from the villages to the cities, and obviously anything that makes cities healthier, walkable, and at the same time create job opportunities for the people who are moving to the cities is obviously something that's at the top of the agenda, the city's agenda. So thank you for the presentation. I was specifically interested in one aspect you mentioned about the conflict that can come up if the city is not well managed, but even not managed, the tourism and the way the tourism is developed. And I want to ask you, do you have any examples in mind of in which way you can do a citizen engagement in the tourism plans that has really helped well with this issue and has avoided conflict, or has at least had a better impact than those ones where citizens weren't informed or weren't engaged during the development, and therefore the situation now is a lot of social conflict? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm going back to my country of origin. I think that the case of the city of Barcelona has been a very interesting case in terms of how a city that in the 80s was not in the tourism map in the world, because it was, well, they had tourists, but it was not an important destination in Europe in the 80s. Has been transformed in one of the hotspots of tourism in Europe or in the world. I used to say that someone from here knows that when I was in my 20s, the Sagrada Familia of Barcelona was a place that was not ticketed for going. It was a free entrance. It was a place where people from the neighborhood were for the Sagrada Familia as a church, were for praying and for celebrating their faith. And now it's a place with 3 million visitors every year that pays about 20 euros every one. That means a lot of money. And this conversion has been in a very short time. And the city of Barcelona was, in my opinion, a good example on how a good marketing organization could create a good image and could develop a great appealing for the city. Now, I think the city of Barcelona is starting the point of answering your question. The city of Barcelona, after this very big success, has started a process of conflictual relation between tourists and citizens. Tourism is in the pure center of the city debate, urban debate in the city. It was one of the main issues in the last political elections for the city of Barcelona. And now they have started a process of creating conditions for the involvement and engagement of the community in not only in the broad decisions about how tourism should be in the city, but about how tourism in every specific neighborhood could have the best opportunities to be good for tourists, but also for the people. And they have started that doing a creating an office for the next strategic plan for tourism in the city. That the name of the plan is Tourism and the City. That's interesting. It's Tourism and the City, and they have started to create a kind of citizens' commission for the discussion, not only of the plan, but of the different types of decisions that the city is going to do around tourism. Of course, that is not. I'm not saying that it's all perfect in this case, because there are the new municipal government has taken some very controversial decisions, like stop the development of new hotels in the city of Barcelona, and also to go against the, in a very, well, I will say, a very aggressive manner against Airbnb and other players, and that it's creating conditions that are not very good for investors in the city of Barcelona, but they are starting to involve not only the organized people that is in the neighborhood association and so on, but even individuals, and they are, since the last January, they have done a lot of assemblies and a lot of things in order to recreate the tourism model of the city of Barcelona. Well, could be other examples, but but I think that the case of Barcelona could be interesting to follow, because they are doing things that for the moment are not in the agenda of many other cities that have also this kind of problems. For instance, the city of Venice also has this kind of problems between citizens and tourists, and they haven't developed this kind of activities, or Amsterdam or others, but the city of Barcelona is starting to do that. I think that it's worth to follow this example.
Thank you, Salvador. Maybe we'll add, that's a really interesting question, and I think it's one we grapple with in our work quite a bit. So I think there's two dimensions to it. One dimension is gentrification and displacement, and that's either because of tourism or because of any economic growth. You find that the city is starting to push poorer residents out to displace it with either tourism-oriented or just housing opportunities for wealthier groups. And I think here affordable housing policies have a very important role to ensure that subsidies are targeted, to encourage mixed-use housing, mixed-income housing, retention of poorer communities to live into places that have so basically rental vouchers, etc., and other affordable housing policies, plus a few regulatory instruments, one of which is called inclusionary zoning. And that's, as you plan a large-scale housing development, a percentage of the unit need to be devoted for lower income groups to ensure, that if you will, the social impact agenda is attenuated. So that's displacement and gentrification. The other dimension of tourism is the exact opposite. When tourism starts having an island effect, and when the tourist comes in and does not touch at all the life of the local communities around the tourist and cultural assets, and that's another issue we're grappling with, and Stefania's work in India is one that really touches on this issue, which is how do you take the impact of tourism and spread its benefit to the city? And I don't know if she wants to say something about that, or...
We can spend hours talking about India and tourism and culture and walkability, but the India case is fascinating. Thank you, Sami, because it's the opposite. The core of the historic cities are the richest in terms of economic vibrancy. It's the opposite in terms of Latin America. I work in Quito, where you have nobody living in the historic cities. So it's the opposite. For us, it's very much, as you said, how we keep these economic, but we bring in the infrastructure in because it's Islam at the end of the day. But I think, Sabit, perhaps rather than elaborate on India, which is a university itself, I think there is two points here I would like to add to your point, Sami, which is the governance aspect. For instance, Curitiba, I'm from Brazil, I'm an urban planner, and I have been very, I had the opportunity to be part of all this development of Curitiba, etc., be actually there when things were happening. But there was behind that a very visionary mayor and a dictator. He would decide things overnight and get it done next day, no matter who wants and doesn't. And that's how, but he also, I think, was important in his leadership was the vision, as you said. He was developing Curitiba for the people, for the residents. And he was very clear about what are the various economic drivers, and tourism is one of them. For instance, what you show here is a garden that happens to be visited by others, but this is for the population, no? The botanical gardens. But I think one thing is the whole governance, and I think your question is extremely important, how much of the people setting up the vision at the government level, say, okay, I'm going to develop this city for you people, and then bringing the people along to help in this development. And this, your question is extremely important. What are the tools? And they are there, etc. But also there is the issue about when you talk about tourism, you're talking about assets and attractions. And I think there is the whole thing about setting a value for the attractions, right? Perhaps Barcelona is selling its attractions, it's too cheap. You should just, I'm working now in Bhutan, they have not a single of their monuments has a ticket, has a fee entrance. And we are saying, you got to start charging, and don't charge 5 cents. You know, like the Taj Mahal costs $1. It costs what, $9 for a foreigner, and it costs about $1 for an Indian to visit. This is a shame. This is ridiculous. We are saying you got to charge this, because these assets, if they go, there is no replacement unless you want to build a Disney World. So I think also there is this parallel in terms of all the urban instruments, the financing, the urban development, whatever, but there is the governance issue, and the how you value your assets, and how then you present to the tourists and to the citizens. I don't know, this is, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, two questions about that. I agree with you about, I will say in this manner, the best tourism policy for a city in terms of place management or placemaking, it's policy for its locals. I am very clear in that. At the best, if you build with your people, when I say you, the city, no, not the, of course, leadership is important, but it's the city who is building something, something that is good for the community, that could be good for tourists. And if you have the vision of create products from there, then the city, at the scale that it's the city, because there are capital cities, regional cities, provincial cities, at the scale that it has, it is the city, could have a very successful tourism development. But the key is not that probably that could be very strange, because I am analyzing from the tourist side. But the key is not thinking only in tourists. Is thinking in locals, and that used to be the best practice, the best practice. It is and. If you do that with vision, as you said, and in a long term, you can do that in a long term period, that used also to be a good manner to go ahead, because visions that has been cut by many different reasons. There are a lot in the history of cities. And the second thing, I also agree with you. It's the success. When the success of one city is because of price, then we have a problem. And that's true. That, for instance, I talked about the city of Barcelona. The city of Barcelona, it's a success, but it's not among the top cities in Europe in terms of price. And I'm not saying the price of the assets. I'm saying just the price of a room. It's a cheap destination in European and of course in American United States standards. Is a cheap destination, and that is one of the reasons of the city, of the success of tourism in the city. And then there is also that could be also other things around here. That is when talking about what the community is doing. In terms of tourism, in the case of Barcelona, I following to talk because I introduced before, and but I think it's interesting. And I said before, the community is now involved in the governance. At least they are starting to have some tools to involve the community in the governance of the city. that it's perfect. But one of the problems of the city of Barcelona in terms of the tourism is the behavior of the citizens of the city of Barcelona. The problem has not been only a problem because there are a lot of cities, a lot of tourists in the city, and they do as they want. The problem is that many owners of apartments in the city of Barcelona that prefer go outside of their place in the center of the city and they localize themselves to other place to rent the room than to be part of the city in the place where they are living. And those people are also the people that are involved in the governance of the tourism in the city of Barcelona, even though they are not participating directly. And that has started a new process. It was a very interesting analysis some weeks ago about how this process of empty apartments in the city has created a kind of vicious circle, because when there are one or two, then there are some business people that go there and try to get all the community for tourists. And then that means that there is a process of extracting locals from the city, in this case without gentrification. That is also an interesting thing, because there is not a case of gentrification that the city gets, or one part of the city gets better standards and then people is going there and the population that it was there is relocated. No, in this case there is no gentrification. There is just displacement of the population because of this cheap business that if you add different assets could be good enough for specific people. That's interesting.
Thank you very much, Professor Clavé, and I'd like to ask you to join me in a round of applause for our speaker.